So, yep, I'm Jefferson. I'm going to talk about Vault, which is something that we're building at the Internet Archive, but I'm less going to talk about this as like a product pitch or a demo, and more talk about it in the context of how we're trying to build the service in sort of keeping in mind the NDSA levels of digital preservation. And since we are in the innovation track, and I haven't really heard any innovation talk about innovation at like some kind of meta level, I'm going to throw some of that in at the end just for provocation and maybe to elicit some Q&A. So if you don't know anything about the Internet Archive, the old fact slide here, we're a nonprofit digital library and archive. Started in 1996, headquarters in San Francisco, California, but operating worldwide with other legal entities in other countries as well. We own, run, and operate all our own data centers. We have 7 in 3 different countries. We have a whole bunch of digitization and web and archiving data services used by about 1,500 mission-aligned organizations in 40 countries. Do a lot of open source software, community and congressional advocacy, and things like that. People are like, how big is Internet Archive? Well, we're currently about 100-ish petabytes unique. Of course, multiple copies of all of that, so in the hundreds of petabytes total. Archiving 60 to 70 terabytes every day, and we get about 1.5 million users per day, which puts us in the top 150, 100-ish websites by traffic. There are the stats for the different collections. Of course, the web collection is the best known and is how it got started. Still, I think, the largest public web archive in the existence. But there's a lot of stuff in the archive as well, and there's a little slide about the growth, which is getting a little horrifying recently. How did we come about to start working on Vault project? Well, we already provide a range of storage and preservation services, from the very basic to the highly customized. And we want to do something that sort of can try to meet both ends of these spectrums while still operating in the middle and really being low cost, extensible, more feature-rich than archive.org, where you can go and you can upload anything for free as much as you want. Basically, you're going to get the number of copies, minimum 2, that we decide. It'll be stored where we decide. You don't have a lot of collection management functionality, things like that. At the other end of the spectrum, we have government contracts and customized services that are much more feature-rich and, of course, expensive and high cost. So we're trying to figure out what's the middle ground and how can that be useful to a larger community. Some basic features: it's content agnostic. This is not just web data. It's not digitized works. It's any type of data. In the service, you're able to customize the replication, so however many replicas you want. I mentioned we have 7 data centers in 3 countries, so you get to decide where it lives. So there's geopolitical and geolocation redundancy. We have different storage architectures that we work with, both block storage and object storage. And there's customization around fixity, audit, repair, frequencies from very infrequent to highly frequent. And then, of course, the service will have all the sort of deposit API integrations and other bells and whistles. We started this project as a pilot, and we got pilot partners involved from the very beginning, which you might regret a little bit since it wasn't built when they started participating in the pilot. But we basically recruited them from a number of our other services, and they were interested. So it's been a very user-driven, iterative process in partnership with the pilot partners. Started mid-late last year, aiming for early release next year. We have about 50 pilot partners, and as part of participating as a pilot partner, they get 1 or 2 terabytes free that we'll store forever. We do, of course, check-ins, meetups, surveys, feedbacks, user stories, all that stuff. In trying to do a sort of basic repository to a very highfalutin repository, we encountered some interesting use cases of people that had needs that we didn't really expect. One is that they want to use Vault as an appraisal platform, so a place they can quickly put stuff, appraise it, QA it, get rid of it, whatever. Other people want to use it as a staging or transfer service, so maybe for ingest into another system, and they need a quick and easy way to upload data somewhere that they can then put it somewhere else. And as a restricted access platform to give access to researchers. So those were interesting. Why did the pilot partners come to us? What are they interested in participating? A lot of these are getting started in digital preservation, so we work with a lot of small public libraries, historical societies, as well, of course, as like national libraries and governments. So I think there's a nascent digital practice as a large part of it. There's a number of institutions that had very immediate, large-scale, sudden acquisitions of content that they really didn't have the time to go through their internal bureaucracy to figure out how to find storage or work with their own IT, and they just need to put 100 or 500 terabytes somewhere, quote unquote, quickly. We work with a lot of consortia in providing these services, so the consortia were interested in a service that could meet, of course, both extremes of the use cases I mentioned. Cost considerations, which I'll talk about more, and people are most interested in both geolocation, the dashboard, and replication functions. What do they say are the challenges in their current digital preservation services, or what they have researched trying to implement a service locally? People are, of course, very cost sensitive, which I don't need to tell anyone here. They're also worried about vendor lock-in and, of course, working with non-mission aligned for-profit commercial entities. Open source software is very difficult for a lot of these institutions to implement. They either don't have the infrastructure or they don't have the IT staff. A lot of them are being pushed into the commercial cloud by their provost or their CEO or their director, and that's an institution-wide push that doesn't necessarily take into consideration the specialized needs of digital preservation. Feature creep and retreat, I call it, which is there's a little lack of clarity on what features should be done in-house or locally and what should be done in an external tool or a vendored service. And a lot of these digital preservation services, of course, don't co-locate data for preservation, access, and potentially for computational use. And that is something that we do all in our own infrastructure, so there's advantages there. We are a nonprofit. We can make no money, even though we can charge for services. We obviously, our mission statement is universal access to all knowledge. I think that's pretty mission aligned. As mentioned, we own and operate all our own data centers. We ourselves have geographic and geopolitical redundancy, not just in the infrastructure, but also in our legal entities and in our operations. We have efficiencies of scale. Since we run our own data centers, we can do it much cheaper than Amazon or Google. We are looking at a cost model that is different than other services, which is a one-time forever fee. There's no annual storage cost. There's no data egress cost, which for those who are in the AWS world know eats up a lot of the money. We're doing it a la carte by feature. So if it's going to be very cheap, if you just want really basic, and more expensive the more things you add on, like more copies, more places, more frequent fixity checks, things like that. We, of course, prioritize public data and open access, so there will be tiered costs for private data will cost more, and public data will be cheaper. And we have a lot of grants, get a lot of grants, work with a lot of major donors, so a lot of the fully subsidized services that we provide to smaller organizations actually come from philanthropic and foundation funding, and that will be just as relevant here to Vault. So that's the product. How we're trying to build this in conjunction with the original NDSA levels of digital preservation, which I was a co-creator on way back in the day. So I tried to sort of map the principles of the levels of preservation and how we're organizing them in product development sense. There's way too much text on this slide for me to read, and I'm at 8 minutes and 30 seconds. So maybe look it up online. But trying to think of the goals and objectives that we made generalizable, but practical, at least in the original levels of preservation, and then trying to take those goals, concepts, and principles and apply them to product development, from the cost model to what the feature development roadmap is to how we work with specific types of institutions and things like that. So I think there's more to talk about here than I have in my 15-minute talk. So there is actually, an app. We have a dashboard. It shows all dashboard-y typey stuff. There's a collection management interface. Again, this is still in development with, 4 to 6 or 8 months until public release. We have both web uploader form, because that's what many of our institutional users need. They don't need programmatic deposit access, but we also have APIs and command line tools as well. If you're interested in being a pilot partner, there's the alias email, vault@archive.org. As mentioned, you get a couple of free terabytes of forever storage, and all you have to do is just tell us how it's working, how it's going, talk to us every once in a while. Abrupt segue on innovation. So this is the innovation track. Heck, this is the innovation center, apparently. But not a lot of these talks are actually about innovation. 5 minutes, perfect. And so I was thinking and doing the presentation and trying to think about how does this all tie to innovation. And I had some questions, which is how do we even conceptualize or describe innovation in digital preservation? Is it a category? Is it a strategy? Is it a product demo, an ontology, a methodology? What is it? And I don't really hear that talked about all that much, and I think it would be interesting to talk about. What are the aims and objectives of innovation in digital preservation? I think maybe it's all of these, or some of these, or none of these. Novelty, efficacy, efficiency, affordability, experimentalism. What are we trying to achieve when we say something is innovative or that we are trying to do something innovative? So I'm thinking about that. How does this presentation, or even all the presentations and conversations here, tie into the idea of innovation? So to sort of like steal a little Cliff Lynch-ism for those that know Cliff Lynch, the things that have been on my mind lately are these things. One, this thing up here, which is a line graph. The blue is the total expenditures of universities, and the black is the total expenditures of universities on their libraries. And these are going, obviously, in completely opposite directions. A headline from The Guardian. Britain has closed almost 800 libraries since 2010. Yeah. The Guardian is a great resource for talking about the calamitous situation of libraries in the UK, for what it's worth. This bottom quote is from a Spark report, which I forgot to cite, but nearly 80% of libraries had to contend with budget cuts as a result of COVID. Over 20% reported having experienced a cut of 10% or more, and the vast majority of these who experience cuts anticipate that these reductions will likely be permanent. Budgets, not looking so good. Next, the archive census that was just published by the Society of American Archivists in Ithaca, which surveys the whole field of archives. And the question is, are you considering leaving the archives profession within the next 5 years? 20% yes, 25% not sure. So almost half of the archives profession is either intending or considering leaving the profession in the next 5 years. The patient ain't healthy. This is an economic, professional, and institutional situation that seems a little dire, right? Yet, has anybody heard much talk about this at this conference or outside of hallway conversations? I guess I haven't. So here's a screamy slide from things that I picked up on day one and just maybe caused a little sort of cognitive dissonance, let's say. Avoid, build it, and they will come. Always a good idea in principle. But at the same time, there's one active ISO 16363 certified organization, as we saw in the presentation yesterday. That sounds like a build it and they will come type of thing. So is ISO 16363 the greatest build it and they will come project in digital preservation? I don't know, but you can tweet that, and I'm not on Twitter, so it won't really, matter to me. Implementing digital preservation takes a long time, certainly true. But, prior slide, salary freezes, and this comes up in hallway conversations too. Staff exits, people leaving to go to industry, go to startups. Institutional changes, always happening, but certainly seeming to happen a lot more recently. Values-driven practices, something we all agree with. And yet how many services and products have we heard from that are just putting stuff in AWS or built on top of AWS or GCP? Are those mission-aligned, values-driven organizations? I'll leave that for you to decide. There will be some astronomical zettabytes number of digital content created in 2020-something. Yet, we have increasing cost, I have 1 minute, and declining budgets. And we need to do something. But how many postmortems are we doing of things that haven't worked in digital preservation? How much have we talked about the DPN collapse and things like that? We commercial vendor to do something. Corporate consolidation is a huge issue in universities and scholarly communications, and I think increasingly in digital preservation as well. So, last slide. How are we aligning innovation in digital preservation and its tendencies towards focusing on internalities with the constellation of these problematic contemporary externalities? And when we, as a profession and a community, are asked to do ever more with ever less, maybe we don't need more frameworks and more standards, but we need a revolution. What is a revolution? We're not going to like tear down the gates or anything, but can we have a sort of revolution spirit or revolutionary zeal that can motivate how we think of innovation in digital preservation? So there's my email if you disagree with me or want to yell at me. There's Vault if you're interested in participating, and we're having a meetup on Friday for our Internet Archive friends and partners with free lunch, and I'll buy you free drinks if you tell me I'm wrong. Thanks for the talk.
Do you want to put it back on that slide with the questions?
I think I'm out of time.
Thank you. So it seems like we've been posed questions rather than asking questions, but I will see if anyone has any firstly for Jefferson. And I will look this time rather than... Yes, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you for that and for the nice challenge to my brain. Lindsay Memory, Brigham Young University. I've stuck 35,000 books into Internet Archive. Love you guys. You had mentioned that you use Vault, or somebody was using Vault as an, where did my notes go? Is like an access for
Appraisal?
Appraisal, yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, they were having problems finding a solution where they could put something up and have sort of interns or grad students quickly go through and assess material for quality as to whether they would preserve it permanently. So sort of pre-accession it, they got all the data. It was either donated, I believe it was donated and funded, and they weren't planning on keeping it all, but they didn't have, it was too much content for them to put on a staging server locally. You know, why that was, I don't remember. But they basically wanted a way to throw things up quickly, give access to multiple users in a, password restricted environment, and they could tag it or keep little notes on what was worthwhile and what was not, and then they would decide what to keep locally. How they were doing the appraisal or what the qualities of that were, I wasn't, privy to, but.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Not really, sorry.
Now?
Sure.
I'm Patricia Seaman from UN High Commission for Refugees. Okay, so what does a revolution look like?
I don't know, I just pose the questions for people to think about. Innovation, I think, is contesting or interrogating orthodoxy, right? And if we're going to have digital preservation sort of trickle down to medium, small organizations, or any organization that wants to collect and provide access to digital materials in the long term, I think they're still, even after all the work in the original levels of preservation, daunted by some of the standards and expectations and certifications that we take for granted. Is that revolutionary? No, I don't think everybody needs to be track certified or anything like that. But questioning our own embedded beliefs and assumptions about practices, best practices, things like that.
I think one of the things that disappointed me in the community is how, I'm going to say this, how little we look at access and delivery. I know that there's lots of work going on in this area, but I am just a practitioner at the front line, and I am looking for a way of delivering my content for researchers in the community that I serve, and real solutions for that is what I would like. Yeah, and I mean, you obviously do it.
Agree with that. The old axiom of access drives preservation.
Yeah.
Like at some point, people will not pay to preserve things that nobody
Real
can see or use.
solutions that I can implement easily, and so that's what I would like as a revolution. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Sorry, one last round of applause. Thank you, Jefferson.